It's called an inner life, George.
Everything is ready, my darling. Do not be afraid. Soon we'll be together again.
This sandwich tastes as dry as hell.
Hello and welcome to Hello, This is the Doomed Show. I am Richard. Folks, it's probably still winter when we release this episode, I hope, because it's cold. And this movie's cold, but LeEtta is hot. Welcome, LeEtta.
Thank you. Actually, it's cold in here. It's cold in here, too. So
Oh, okay.
I'm cold.
You're like, I'm not feeling so hot. Feeling kind of cold. Folks, we're going to talk about The Wendigo from 2001. Written and directed by Larry Fessenden. We're going to spoil this movie. And so since it just came out in 2001, I'll feel bad for you people who just bought your theater tickets to see it. Go watch the movie. But first, before any other here we do's, here's the trailer for The Wendigo.
It can fly at you like a sudden storm without warning and devour you, consume you with its ferocious appetite.
Deep in the woods. I'm sure we're not far off.
I'm glad you're sure of it, George.
Hold on! There are laws you cannot know.
My name is George. I'm sorry about the deer, but I'd like you to please stay away from the car if you don't mind.
Legends you cannot believe.
There are spirits that should be feared because they're angry.
And a force you cannot fight.
A Wendigo is a mighty, powerful spirit.
That man knows where we live.
What are you? The devil?
Wendigo.
Don't be scared, kiddo. Don't be scared.
And it's time to when to stay right here, because we're talking about The Wendigo. Don't be Wendigoing. I have the beautiful artisanal DVD here. It's from Artisan. It's not really like a cheese or anything. No cheese inside it. Although our cats, except for Cheese, are all in here. We have a cat named Cheese. The back of the DVD claims, as Kim and George, Patricia Clarkson and Jake Weber, and their son Miles, Eric Sullivan, drive to the Catskills to spend a weekend away, they accidentally hit a deer and are run off the road. But what seems to be a mere occurrence of misfortune marks the beginning of a terrifying journey, where myth becomes reality and an evil spirit, half man and half animal, haunts a small town, 3 little periods, ... Color, 92 minutes. We watched it. We bought this DVD a long time ago.
Slightly misleading.
Well, that's okay. The misleading part was that I waited like 2 years before we watched this movie we wanted to watch together. Because we like some folklore. Sorry, our cat is being crazy.
No, it's Cheese.
Oh, Cheese is here, folks, and she's harassing her big sister, Gorgon, as she do. So yeah, we put this off for a while, but now is the time. This stars Patricia Clarkson, the wonderful, wonderful woman from Easy A,
The headmaster from the woods.
The Woods was the next thing.
The headmistress, I guess.
Yes, which needs a Blu-ray. The old DVD of The Woods is fine, but it's just such a great movie that the people who like it, I think, just love it. I can't imagine there's people who are like, it's kind of meh. I watched that and I went, oof. Jake Weber, who's in a lot of stuff, but I wrote down that he was the husband on The Medium. Do you remember that show with Patricia Arquette where she was a psychic?
Barely.
He was the husband.
Okay.
We didn't really watch that show. I thought you'd find that amusing. And we got Eric Per Sullivan. I have no idea if that's P-E-A, like his middle name. P-E-R is supposed to be Per or Pear. Either way, he's from Malcolm in the Middle. And then I think he stopped acting like a while ago. He's like, I'm tired of being in the middle. John Spiridakos. I'm hoping that's how you pronounce that. He plays Otis. They could have gone for a less generic, villainous hillbilly name than Otis, maybe.
Is Otis a villain name, though? I would have never thought it would be. Like, Otis is maybe a really popular dog name now.
Well,
can imagine it being a bulldog or something. Otis.
The most famous Otis I'm thinking of is from Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer.
Oh, well.
And that's the Otis I know. So maybe it's just that one role that's so ubiquitous. What's that name? Ubiquitous? Is that the right word? Infamous? Infimiquitous? I don't know. But that guy was in House of the Devil and some other cool horror stuff. And last but not least, we got Christopher Wingcoop as Sheriff Tom Hale. What the hell? He's in stuff. He has a small but like memorable role from Ghostbusters, but I haven't seen Ghostbusters in like 30 years, so I don't know. He's a reporter, I guess.
In the first movie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there more?
Yes.
There's so many more. We're going to run through the plot here to spare you and ourselves a scene by scene, blow by blow, because this movie is actually pretty simple. Mm-hmm. It's just people go to house after getting harassed by some hillbilly meanies, or just one in particular, and then
the message of which would be city people should never go to the country.
Just don't go. Just don't go.
Yeah.
And then hilarity ensues. Wendigo style, the end. Okay. So when they arrive at this house after the very intense exchange with Otis over a dead deer, because you cracked one of the horns, that was a lot of money, and they find out where they're going, which turns out to be very important. This house that they are renting from their friends, that becomes a pivotal moment. We'll find out why later. As they're settling in, Dad finds a hole in the window and then a hole in the wall, and he takes his little penknife out and pulls out a bullet. So someone has shot the house. But he keeps this a secret. Don't do that. You find that bullet, you tell everybody who will listen about it, and then list all your enemies for them, with like names and addresses, so the cops have a starting point when you're murdered. They're hanging out. It's full of menace. Things seem scary. And then that night, Miles, the little boy, he discovers, much to his chagrin, that they're not getting any channels. The cable's off, if they even get cable out there. And he says all the movies aren't good, which I was very disappointed. You can't see the tapes.
Oh. That's why this is a pivotal scene for you.
No.
You can't see the tapes he has to choose from.
No. What they do is to illustrate this, they show Miles with his face and his hands pressed up against the blue TV screen. And it's this really super striking image that I find amazing, because I am such a huge Malcolm in the Middle fan. I've seen at least 3 episodes. Maybe even less. There's a great line of dialogue that I'm going to put as the intro for the show. Kim and George are talking, and she says to him, "It's called an inner life, George." I love that. That's going to be the intro to the show. She's a psychologist, and she's got some analyzing to do. That night, as they're tucking Miles in this strange house that he's never been to before, Dad decides to be creepy. This was a scene I did not appreciate. It adds to the tone of the movie, but as a child, as I am now in my current age, child age, I did not appreciate Dad doing that. He was too good at it. It's like how I don't scare you if I can help it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I scare everyone I meet because of how sad and pathetic I am.
I was surprised. I do look up some synopses to warn myself about what this thing is I'm watching. And just to clarify, I found references that, that they were beset by darkness as soon as they entered the house. And, finding a bullet in your wall is disturbing. Having a mom who moved to Arizona and found a bullet in her wall and, blood somewhere in the kitchen, it's just something that kind of happens in places where a lot of shooting goes on.
Yeah.
The descriptions I found made it seem as though the house was somehow possessed.
Ooh. And
that's not the darkness that you get from watching the movie.
No. I will say this. I think our relief was palpable. It was pulpable. It was pulpy. Was that this is not a home invasion movie.
No.
Which, folks, when you buy a house...
Or home tormentor movie.
Yeah. Either way, unwelcome guests makes us very, very triggered because we don't want that. We don't even have like an actual thing that happened. We're just terrified of that from movies. So the home invasion subgenre of horror has been stricken from the record from this house. Like, so many home invader movies have been purged from my movie collection, including some favorites like The Strangers and You're Next. Those are great movies, but nah, we're good. We have a home to defend now, and other than tips and tricks, we don't want to watch. That's not entertaining anymore. And that might not be true for other people who've bought a new house. Well, bought an old-ass house like our house is old. Having enraged Otis on the road, he has decided to come and hang out outside the house. George and Kim do what 1% of couples do, which is make the sex act. All the babies that are born are just from that 1% of people. That's why there's 8 billion people on the planet.
On the couch on a ground floor of a house they've never been to, with all of the windows, like all the blinds open. I say now that actually lowers it down to 1%, because parents with kids, I think, are probably a little bit more secretive about their sex act. At least my parents were.
They do it under the covers with the clothes on.
The door locked.
And the door locked with the lights blazing. No. So they're having sex on the couch, and Otis is watching from the window, and he looks what I interpreted as, oh yeah, but in a scary way. And, he looked angrier, but anger and horny are the same expressions. I'm getting a look here. I just say things so I get looks like that from LeEtta. That's why I'm here. But we'll find out later that had a very different meaning. His look of rage was, like actual rage and not a boner. Presumably. I'm going to pass this over to LeEtta for this scene. The next day, Kim and Miles are in a little grocery store, presumably just looking around, or it's like a tchotchke store. General store?
The characters call it a thrift store.
Oh, okay.
The store itself is labeled as a pharmacy.
Oh, because Dad goes to the grocery store, like capital G groceries, and they're just in this other store. Thank you. A gentleman behind the counter who appears to be of Native American descent starts telling Miles about a creature. What is he talking about?
Well, there's a figure. There's a small carved figure in the glass display case that Miles is looking at. And the man behind the counter starts telling him about the Wendigo. He says some choice lines, and you have to accept them as being very important because they're repeated often through the rest of the movie. One kind of throwaway line is that no one believes in spirits anymore. That is quickly followed with, there are spirits that should be feared because there are spirits that are angry. And, of course, he who hears the cry of the Wendigo is never the same again. In his description of what the Wendigo is, he makes it very clear that the Wendigo has an insatiable hunger, and it is an angry spirit.
He's hungry for livers.
And then he sends a little boy off with a permanent reminder of the scary story.
Yeah, which is one of the origins of this movie. So, Mom barters with the lady over the figure so that Miles can keep it. And, it's just like, the lady looks confused. The man gave it to him. And of course she's like, what man? And I kept making the man with the power joke. What power? Power of hoodoo. Hoodoo?
No, I think we need to do it. You can't do it yourself. You remind me of the man.
What man?
The man with power.
What power?
The power of hoodoo.
Hoodoo?
You do.
Do what?
Remind me of the man.
All right. And then it starts over. See Cary Grant and a young, but not too young, Shirley Temple.
Probably older than most people think. A teenage Shirley Temple.
Young enough. That movie's a little creepy if you think about it. But that's okay. It's Cary Grant. He can do what he wants.
Hi. Mala greetings, Yuki Dookie.
Dickie.
Ready, Poop? Let's scoot.
Reet.
Reet. Hey, you remind me of a man.
What man?
The man with the power.
What power?
The power of hoodoo.
Hoodoo?
You do.
Do what?
Remind me of a man.
What man?
The man with the power.
Good morning.
Power of Greetings, greetings.
Are you out of your mind?
What?
What are you trying to do?
On the way home, Miles now, he's a very imaginative child, and his brain is filled with all kinds of Wendigo fun. So he starts seeing these reminders of the dead deer everywhere, and he starts seeing things that could be the Wendigo or represent the Wendigo, and like lots of Native American kind of statuary things in the town and just creepy stuff. But you saw something, I remember it vaguely. What was it you saw about that drive home?
Well, I saw on the drive home, they are passing several carved figures. There are wooden Indians, as they were out in front of shops, but they're kind of standing independently outside of shops. And there are also totems all along the drive home. And while those are flashing, George starts telling the story about how the lake they're passing by, the New York Reservoir, so we kind of get the idea they're in upstate New York now, was formed by flooding a village. So there's a village beneath the water. I found this interesting just in that it adds a little bit of creepiness to it. It's a way that this movie seems to pack in peripheral folklore and never follow up on it. It's just an extra ghost story that they're passing by, you know.
Bonus. After this outing, Dad and Miles go out for a fun adventure of sledding, which, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've seen, you know, America's Funniest Home Videos. I know how these sledding adventures really end with hospital visits, and that's also true here. But the really creepy thing here is that as they're headed down the side of this hill, all of a sudden we think we hear a shot, and Dad falls, you know, he exclaims and then falls, and then Miles just keeps on trucking in the sled. And of course, Dad's been shot. It wasn't Otis who did it. It was the Wendigo. It was the Wendigo with his powerful rifle. So we have some craziness where Miles believes he's being chased by the Wendigo, and he faints, and Mom finds him, which this part was the most unbelievable.
Well, they say, actually, he tells his mother that he ran into a tree and knocked himself out, which I didn't see that. I thought he fainted too.
Yeah, maybe they couldn't show that, or maybe we just see things from Miles's perspective,
yeah,
and he's not going to remember it.
Maybe.
I don't know. I'd remember it, but...
But yes, woman finding small boy lying down in a wooded, snowy area.
In the dark.
In the dark.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, Mom finds him.
Those are the powers of Mom.
And they're running around looking for George. They talk to the actually nice people of this little town who
are friends of Otis.
They're friends of Otis's, and they kind of think he's a character, and they kind of think he's a little ridiculous. They're not really putting two and two together that maybe Otis is disturbed. So Mom and Miles leave there because she's, you know, letting her probably reasonable fear of these people get, you know, she doesn't want to trust them. Plus they're all covered in frickin' deer blood as they're chopping up some dead deer.
Well, it's a big job. You really don't want to do it inside. You want to do it outside on a table so you can just hose it down.
And not with your best linens on the table.
Correct. I've been in a house where a deer was carved up in the kitchen. It wasn't even a house. It was a 2-bedroom apartment, and just the smell of meat. It wasn't even cooked. It was just being carved. The smell of meat permeated that apartment for a week.
Ugh.
So yeah, do it outside.
That reminds me of the luau I went to. I don't ever want to go to a luau again. I like pork, especially at my Vietnamese restaurant. I love the way they prepare it. But man, the smell of a pig cooking in that pit, didn't care for it. Didn't care for it.
Can I help you with something?
I'm trying to find my husband.
Husband?
There's been an accident.
What kind of accident?
Have you seen my husband?
What's he look like?
What was the name of the guy who left? He pulled out in his truck just before I got here.
Otis?
Brandon, put those on the bench.
I mean, it was you that was out on the road last night, right? You're staying up at the Suki place this weekend?
Anyway, I'm sorry I saw a light on. I needed to check. Come on, Mom.
Well, just a minute. I mean, did you have some kind of accident you want to tell or something?
Yeah, what happened?
No, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I have to run. Come on. Free. Come on. Hold on.
Jesus
Hold on.
Christ. Just let her go.
Dad, where do you want to?
I put him in the freezer, Brandon.
They find our pal George shot, and they rush him to the hospital. Although it's really funny, the shot of the car going along the road to the hospital, it looks like it's going 35. Like, put the pedal to the metal, Mom.
It is very snowy.
It is snowy, true. They get to the hospital, and we have this huge thing with George, who believes he's dying, rightfully so. Just telling his family how much he loves them. It's very sweet. It's like, oh, man. And then Kim finds out, while George is in surgery, Kim finds out whose house their friends have lent them.
Yes, the sheriff shows up, and it was something Kim had wanted. She initially called the hospital to tell them to be ready. She asked them to call the sheriff and arrange it. You understand from the short phone conversation that they were not going to do that for her. So she had to call the sheriff on the way to the hospital. And he meets them there. And while figuring out where they're staying, he identifies it as it's the Stuckey house. And identifies Otis, when she's trying to explain what has happened to them this weekend, as Otis Stuckey.
Mm-hmm.
So the sheriff then explains that Otis's parents passed on one after the other and left the house to his sister, who then sold it and moved away. So Otis was out his family home. He lives elsewhere nearby. But that might be one of the reasons why he's creepily hanging around the house. I think the sheriff also mentions maybe knowledge that Otis has been firing at the house. Or maybe he does that in the very next scene where the sheriff goes to see Otis, tells Otis, I know you've been shooting up the Stuckey house, which explains the bullets in the wall.
Yep.
Now, this technically wasn't on my scene, but it's like right after my scene.
What you got?
Just this interaction with the sheriff and Otis is probably one of the only times I've seen in a movie where the interaction seems civil enough, but based on how the sheriff is asking for Otis's cooperation, what he's not telling Otis. He's spinning a yarn like he wants Otis to go in for a statement about the deer incident.
Yep.
This sheriff is afraid of Otis Stuckey.
Mm-hmm.
And he keeps reminding Otis that his deputy's on the way. And yeah.
He lets it slip. Oh, I was up at the hospital. Like, you were up at the hospital? Why were you at the hospital? And it's like, uh-oh.
And this interaction is really the only confirmation that we get that Otis really was the shooter.
Yep. Because he then kills the sheriff. And then he grabs his gun and just goes off. We don't know where he's going, what he's going to do. We don't know if he's just fleeing or if he's going to go shoot somebody else. Who knows what he's doing?
No, but in the midst of that, he already hears the Wendigo.
Yes.
Which harkens back, and it might even be said in the man from the pharmacy's voice that he who hears the Wendigo is never the same.
Yep.
And this is also something else that stuck out. So he is being haunted now by the Wendigo, and we see the creature. It's like a were-deer.
Yeah.
Or a were-elk, which is apropos. Otis is a hunter. He shoots them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there are footsteps in the snow, which remind me of a story I read as it comes after him in his truck. And there's also a voice telling him to give me back my liver.
Yep.
Or give me my liver.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of yet another ghost story that is peripheral of, people in a cabin making stew with a foxtail and being tortured and terrorized by scratching at the wall, asking to give them back its tail.
I strongly urge y'all to give me my tail. No, I like this, the thing pursuing Otis and the give me my liver is very interesting because apparently his bullet is what is going to kill George, but it pierced his liver.
Yeah,
which
we
is why
find out
George is
briefly in the hospital.
Very briefly, just a throwaway line.
Yep.
Otis wrecks his truck and gets all crunked up presumably from the Wendigo. But hey, all of these things, everything that's happened could be explained away. And that's why I like what the director is doing, is explaining everything away with, could this all just be hallucinations from various characters, Miles especially, of just, these things are just coincidences that are happening and weirdness. But I forgot my point. So George dies in the hospital, and for some reason, I love this moment, they hand Kim his boots. Here's his boots. And she's like, she doesn't really say anything, but she also has a look on her face like, what do I do with these boots?
Well, she looks very crushed.
Oh,
she's kind of turning circles and wandering
yeah.
away.
Yep. That's the good acting from Patricia Clarkson. She's great. But she just disappears. Not like she doesn't get beamed up by Scotty. We look away from her. When we look back, Miles just sees his father's boots just by themselves on the floor. And I really love that image. I thought that was really good. And then the big moment at the end is that they wheel in Otis, who's all busted up. He looks like he's not going to make it, but he makes eye contact with Miles. And he's like, sorry about your dad. Man, I feel bad.
He doesn't say anything.
About your dad.
You do, however, hear the voice of the man from the pharmacy once again talking about how some spirits should be feared because they are angry, which sort of paints the Wendigo as a spirit of vengeance, which is a little off.
Yeah.
In my knowledge of folklore.
Yeah, when we wrap up talking about the movie, we're going to talk about two more things. We're going to talk about the actual Wendigo, the real one I saw one time. No, we're going to talk about the myth surrounding the Wendigo, and we're going to talk about a very famous short story. But before we get to that, trivia on this movie, very minimal beyond what the very interesting Larry Fessenden talked about on the DVD extras. Basically, the project started when he was a young boy because his teacher told the story of the Wendigo to the class, and he didn't really remember all of it because he was very young, but it haunted him. We see footage of him like 5 years or at least 3 years before the movie came out, of him doing a test run with the little stilts you put on your feet and wearing a Wendigo costume and running through the woods while his friends film it and do test footage. So he was working on this for years. I found that really interesting. If there's more trivia out there, I don't know it.
Well, I will add, the credit sequence is beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
It brought back the footprints in the snow.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say it in a very nerdy way, because I've been studying traditional knowledge and ways of protecting it with intellectual property schemes. I was very happy to see that there were parts of the soundtrack that were native singers from the area, and the native singers were properly credited.
Yeah.
And that doesn't usually happen.
Yeah, Fessenden is the guy who did the research and is going to give credit where credit's due. He's the kindest auteur. But yeah, the animated credit sequence, it's not super animated. Just as the credits are rolling up, we're going through these trees. So it's like a black screen and these blue trees, and it's really neat. And the footprints of the Wendigo are getting closer and closer as the credits come to their conclusion. And it just made me think of like all the really, really fancy credit sequences we get now. It reminded me a little of the one for My Soul to Take, which I'm really glad we're recording in this room, because I could look and See My Soul to Take, because otherwise that title wasn't coming back. I knew it was an M, so goody for me.
Who would brighten the holidays with heart-pounding rides and heartwarming shows? Dollywood. Who would put a twinkle in your eye with singing trees and dancing toys? Dollywood. Who would ring in the season with handmade crafts and holiday goodies? Dollywood. And who would wrap it up in the Smokies' biggest Christmas fest from November 10th clear through December 30th?
Ho, ho, ho!
So, LeEtta, how do you like this film?
It was all right.
Yeah.
I mean, I like you said, I was vastly relieved when I found out that the threat from Otis that was established very early on in the film and alluded that it might be sort of a house terrorizing, house hostage thing didn't end up happening that way.
Yeah.
He was the perpetrator, as we find out. He was definitely a threat to them. But the movie, it oddly does a lot that doesn't move the story forward. Like, it has those peripheral mentions to other folklore that's not explored.
Yeah.
It's, I don't know, maybe that it's just there for nerds who catch on. And there's a lot of character building. So, you know, we do learn that Kim is a psychologist, and we learn that after this weirdly even like perfect parenting method that she's executing throughout the film.
Yes.
Until like she gets angry and then she's just a box of swear and her husband has to calm her down. You know, we find out that George has maybe anger management issues and stress compartmentalization issues.
Right.
And maybe she likes to analyze him too much there. But it is interesting in how much they just explain to Miles. They're very honest with him. So there's a lot of character building that doesn't have anything to do with the pressure that's building in the story.
I liked this too. This is not a keeper. The space on the shelves is too precious. But I did enjoy this. This is my third Fessenden movie. Of course, I've seen him as an actor pop up in all kinds of cool stuff like We Are Still Here, where he's particularly good. But I like this on par with The Last Winter, which is a solid movie about climate change and the end of the world. It's really good. But in a horror thing. I don't like his debut movie. I believe it's his feature-length debut called Habit. It's a vampire movie. In its defense, it was absolutely not what I was expecting. So I have a feeling if I watched it again, I would not dislike it. But he has this documentary feel, occasional moments of camera shakery, like a found footage thing, which I don't appreciate those as much as I do the artistic flourishes that this movie's chock full of every camera trick, editing trick, special effects, nothing CGI. There was, though, a bullet time moment, bullet time from the Matrix movies, where everything freezes and you get 3D pivoting. He did that for the scene where they showed that family who was cutting up the deer. He did that. Everything freezes and then the camera's pivoting and you get this like 3D view of that little kid with like holding guts, like, huh? And I was like, wow, he's really going for every single effect he could come up with. But yeah, I think the actual craft behind the movie was cool. I wonder if it reminded me of some of the things that happen in the woods too. I think it's films from this time period have a certain kind of affectations to them. But as far as what the film's about, man, there's tension between, like, bad blood between the natives, the Native Americans and the settlers, which is, the history of our country. But then on top of that, you have the bad blood between the locals and the tourists. So everything is off on the wrong foot from the get-go.
Well, the first is an implied history. You have one character who is later revealed to be a phantom that represents the native community.
Yeah.
Who's providing this information about the folklore. Other than that, you have whispers, you have those wooden totems, but you don't see the tension there. You just know that it's kind of laced throughout the community.
Right.
And then, country residents do not like the Weekenders.
My last two notes are just, thank God there were some laughs. I was glad there was some funny dialogue because, man, this needed some jokes. Mainly, Patricia Clarkson and Jack Weber. They're very funny. They have some good banter between them. And the creature, there might be more than one version of the creature.
Oh, there definitely is.
Yeah, and they're all kind of janky looking, but that's not what this movie's about. This movie's not about the cool sculpture thing that they had laid out in latex to make a sick creature effect. No, it was not about that at all. But, thought I'd mention it. But before we wrap it up, we have a couple more things. First of all is the folklore around the Wendigo. What did you gather about this little beastie?
Well, I didn't do deep research, so apologies if I miss key or important components. The Wendigo folklore comes from Native American tribe and tribes. It's a few of them, and they're all from one area, so they're up north and into Canada. So the stories come from Algonquin Ojibwe, Eastern Cree, Saulteaux, Westman, Swamp Cree, Naskapi, and Innu stories, and they all have slightly different versions. Mainly, the Wendigo is giant. It's like 15 feet.
Wow.
And it's malevolent, and it's a cannibal. It's related with wintry times of famine. And the most interesting thing I find about the story is that the creature itself is supposed to be a huge, gaunt, sallow-faced cannibal creature with glowing eyes, but the Wendigo can possess a man.
Right.
So in times of famine, this drive to eat your fellow man would be an indicator that you've been possessed by the Wendigo.
I love your list of all of the different tribes that had this as they have different versions of it. So you see that there was a common belief even with the smaller details.
Yeah, so there are varieties. It's not across the entirety of the North American continent. What I found very interesting is there's also an identified psychosis around the Canadian areas and the Great Lakes where people would believe that they were possessed by the Wendigo.
Oh, crap.
They would suddenly start looking on their fellow human beings as being edible and tasty. And they would kind of scare themselves. And it was a very localized psychological phenomenon. And it has become much less common in the 21st century.
Because cell phones.
maybe because of the interconnectedness of everybody. You don't feel as alone. I think one of the main components of being possessed by the Wendigo was starvation, famine. But it was also how isolated you were.
Right.
How maybe you were with one or two other people. And there's a whole bunch of being driven, cabin fever, being driven mad by this isolation. There are plenty of poets who talk about the winter madness that takes over people. So it's sort of along those lines. In my head, I'm drawing connections. But yeah, there were different ideas. So in a way, the way that the Wendigo was pictured in different ways in the movie sort of fits with how it had many different descriptions.
Nice. That's a researcher covering his butt. So this legend inspired the writer Algernon Blackwood, who, very interesting, of all the classic horror writers, the turn of the century, oh my God, turn of the
last century
writers, he has some stuff that's very mystical and very complex. Some of his stories are like, was that scary? What did I read? What was that? That was weird. He strays from traditional horror to takes it to another place, almost like a metaphysical kind of thing. And I really like the Wendigo story, which came out in 1910. And it's one of his best known stories. Apparently that and The Willows have been adapted multiple times. The Wendigo has been adapted. I didn't even search for it, like a keyword search, because there's so many movies that have Wendigo in it. It's ridiculous. I'm not even going to go through the whole list, although I did not surprisingly, find out that a recent horror movie called Antlers is one that is inspired by the Wendigo, and that looks really scary, like actually scary. The story is scary. The story, although it does the ponderous thing that writers of that time love to do, which is, a story that could be 15 pages is 50 pages. And there's a lot of people in the scene, be it the main person or a peripheral character, who's trying to sort out this supernatural stuff they just witnessed. Or they're trying to talk somebody down, which is what's going on here with this guy and his friends are hunting out in the middle of nowhere. He and this French-Canadian guy go off together to track moose for them to hunt, while the other guys go off to do something else.
This is during the French fur trading time.
Yeah.
That's what they were hunting for, right?
And so the one guy, the French-Canadian guy, gets taken by the Wendigo. Then this poor dude who was with him, he saw this guy taken and he heard it. Him screaming and all this stuff. This weird poetic thing that the Wendigo would chant as he ran away about his feet burning. And
I was gonna say, wasn't it my feet are on fire?
The burning.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really creepy and very odd. It's just really strange, which is what I love about these types of stories, is that strangeness, the inexplicable things that make the story memorable. And then he meets up with the rest of his crew, and the whole time they're trying to talk him out of what he saw. You didn't see that. You're dreaming, blah, blah, blah. We'll go find him. And the worst thing that could happen, he comes back. This French-Canadian guy just ambles up in the middle of the night. Hey, guys. Man, that was crazy. I saw something, and it was crazy. But it's a little weird. He's a little different. It's his skin, and it's someone wearing his skin, acting like him, but he looks deflated and weird, and his skin's gonna fall off, and his feet look all screwed up, and everything's, man, it's a terrifying story. So they chase it off, and then the saddest part, of course, is when they actually find this French-Canadian, this trapper / hunter guy, and he's wasted away to nothing. His soul, his essence has been stolen, and he's just he couldn't even keep food down. He wanted to eat moss. And that was the strangest thing, was they kept talking about how the Wendigo was a moss eater in the story, which I thought was very strange. But read the story. I know I just spoiled it. Let me do it. There's
so much that you didn't spoil, though.
Right.
Now, I read it much longer ago than you.
Yeah.
Now, the footprints in the snow that I called out from the movie, that is very much seen in the story.
It's a huge part of the story.
And it's related to, the feet are burning as you hear the Wendigo and then the Wendigo's victim say, which I always, in my head, I related it to the cold. Since this happens in the cold, the story happens in the cold, the folklore is tied to the cold, the snow. Your feet, when you have frostbite, it burns.
Yeah. Being
too cold can feel like burning as well. So I always thought that there was that connection there. I'm not sure if that's exactly what it's Blackwood, right?
Yeah.
What Blackwood was saying.
Because he talks about how fast it moves. Mm-hmm. That the speed is what was burning its feet. The Flash of Marvel Comics fame. The one with Batman. Marvel Comics. So, yes, the story is great. I loved it. But yeah, I did think it could be a little shorter. But then again, I think about creepypasta stories nowadays that are our new, urban legend things. And they're always too friggin' long. We've watched a few shows that animate a creepypasta by reading it out loud and narrating it and everything. And there's usually a lot of detail that you're like, yep.
Well, I think...
Okay, guys.
I think they're elaborated on. I think they're made to be longer because you're conveying a simple but powerful idea.
Yeah.
And you need to capture your audience. So a lot of times if you just give your audience a simple but powerful idea, they might be half listening. They're thinking about something else. So you build up and you embellish around it in order to capture their attention so that when you convey the powerful idea, they get it. It's there.
When you say thinking about something else, you mean they're on TikTok.
Yeah, or scrolling on their phone or something. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Did I tell you about my TikTok TV idea? So you know how TikToks are in portrait? They don't film in landscape, they film portrait. So one day in the future, TikTok is going to release a TV. It's going to go floor to ceiling, but it's only going to be like 3 or 4 feet wide. It's going to be this really huge, long TV for just watching TikToks on. And people are going to start making feature-length films in portrait for TikTok.
Am I supposed to honestly say that, yes, you've told me this many, many times?
Let's just say when 4K TikTok Blu-rays hit the market, shit's going to be real. It's litter box time in the Schmidt house. This litter box is not in the same room. It's in another room. But Cheese scratches like she's trying to dig a hole through the earth.
She's not done.
We're going to pretend this isn't happening. LeEtta, we have a segment before I can let you move on with your life and find a new husband. What is a recently seen and loved film? Or, it could be any genre. You could even just say, I feel like watching something. What do you got?
I'm very bad with these questions.
Well, anything, even a movie you love that you want to watch tonight.
Okay, so the first thing that comes to my mind, without looking, like I said, I'm terribly bad at this, especially when you're going to be hanging out, because I feel unwilling to push movies on you that I pick.
Why? It's our movie collection.
I know it is. The one that jumps to mind is actually Robin Hood, the animated Robin Hood, the Disney one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great movie. You never have to make excuses for that.
I used the melody from one of the songs to teach myself to whistle so that I could teach my bird to whistle decades ago. The bird never did learn how to whistle, but I know how to now. And that's the one song that I whistle when I choose to whistle at all. And whistling also will call the cats, at least 2 of them.
Yeah. It's a siren song. You sing a siren song and the cats come running. I picked a very recent watch. We rewatched this last night, which is LeEtta, Battle Angel, from writer, producer, James Cameron of Terminator 2 fame and Titanic. Robert Rodriguez directing. I am a huge nerd fan of Battle Angel Alita, the manga known as Gun M in Japan. And I've read it and reread it. Not the whole thing, but I've reread and read the original 9-volume series. I'm a huge fan. So when we saw it in the theaters, I was very picky. I had a few nitpicks about it I didn't like, but overall, I really enjoyed the film. And revisiting it on Blu-ray disc last night, I was just taken with it all over again. Still have those nitpicks in the back of my head. There's a couple little story things they could have done. But the most shocking thing is that it is the most disgusting gore I've seen in a PG-13 movie. We're talking multiple beheadings, people cut in half, other spoiler things that are really disgusting that I was like, James Cameron, you can get whatever he wants.
When you notice the violence,
Mm-hmm.
and we were talking about, it's like, is it because the blood is blue? Which wouldn't be a spoiler to say that the cyborg character's blood is blue.
Right, they're cyborgs, yeah.
You know what passed without me noticing until I was thinking back?
Mm.
They're what they call the meat bags, right? The fully human characters.
Mm-hmm.
When a meat bag was cut in two, there was no blood at all.
No.
There's nothing.
Yeah, when a human character is stabbed and is basically bleeding to death, they barely show it.
Mm-hmm.
They barely show it. But that's not the thing that makes my brain explode. It's the fact that there are human characters with human brains in these cyborg bodies, not just dying off screen, dying on screen in horrendous, sickening ways.
Yes.
And it's not fair. I grew up in the 80s when the gore, everything was censored. Everything was the MPAA, parents groups, everyone was losing their mind over the dumbest horror shit that was rated R anyway. Those Friday the 13th series films, some of their gore scenes will never be restored. They don't exist. All we can see a little VHS copy of what the people making the special effects shot just as reference material, never expecting, that their work would be thrown away, which it was. I mean, watch Friday the 13th Part 7. There's a couple characters who die, and you're like, how did that person even die? They just disappear. So I'm very sensitive to someone as powerful as James Cameron getting to do whatever he wants and calling up his buddy at the MPAA and be like, yo, don't say anything about this guy who's cut in half and we see the slime between his brain pan as it splits apart. Don't notice that. That's what I'm very upset about. But anyway, that was my recently seen. You were there.
I was there.
Folks, I'm going to say goodbye to LeEtta. And we're probably going to go watch Robin Hood. Not Men in Tights, although that movie's fine. Thank you for listening. And good night.
Good night.
Folks, thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you'd like to write into the show, send an email to doomedmoviethon@gmail.com or hit us up at doomedmoviethon on Instagram or at doomedmoviethon on Twitter or at doomedmoviethon at Discord, or go to Hello This Is the Doom Show on Facebook and message us there. If you want more Hello This Is the Doom Show, go to doomedmoviethon.com and click the podcast button for the archive, or go to YouTube and look up Doomed Moviethon and you'll find the classic episodes of Hello, This Is the Doomed Show. And if that's still not enough, I have written some books, about my love of movies over on Amazon.com. Just look up Richard Glenn Schmidt and you'll find Giallo Meltdown, a Moviethon Diary, Giallo Meltdown 2, Cinema Somnambulist, or Doomed Moviethon, the book. Hello, This is the Doom Show is a proud member of the Legion Podcast Network. Go to legionpodcast.com and check out the other great shows over there.